crime is so bad in America that the National Guard was just deployed to the New York City subway system because there are so few cops that are able to go out there and defeat crime. I'm going to talk about the crisis of policing in America, how what is happening on the New York City subway system is a bellwether for everybody in America, how you are going to need to be your own police officer and why, and what this means for America's churches and those protecting it. Let's go do a deep dive. So yesterday, the New York National Guard deployed to the New York City subway system, about 800 of them, to help supplement bag searches. Think about that for a minute and the Fourth Amendment issues there. But I digress. To do bag searches of people coming on the subway and how somehow that's going to make everybody safer. Now, we're going to talk about what that means with the National Guard. But you have to remember the National Guard was also deployed to San Francisco to deal with their fentanyl problem. All these are self-induced problems. But I know you're wondering, well, how does this affect me? How does it affect my church? Why are you saying that I need to be my own police officer? Because I was a cop for 30 years and I'm seeing how bad policing is right now. Let's just talk about some of the big figures. Retirements are up 45%. Retirements of police officers are up 45%. Resignations of police officers are up 18%. I think that number is low. I think it's probably higher, but we know that people manipulate the stats. And this all began in 2014 with the Michael Brown arrest. In 2014, if you go back in history and remember, Michael Brown tried to grab a cop's gun. He was shot and killed. Everybody went to the streets rioting. Everybody decided to come against the police. And we found out that that was a lie. Remember, President Obama came out and said how bad the police were. Everybody, the whole hands up, don't shoot.
Hands up. Don't shoot.
And everybody came against the police, and we later learned that that was a lie, but everybody kept going with it, and there were stringent standards put against the police. And we'll talk about why that's happening too, because the ultimate goal is a federalized police force, and we'll talk about how that's happening, and we're seeing that. But 6 years later, in 2020, we had the George Floyd incident, and now we're learning in the George Floyd incident that the whole truth wasn't told in that incident either, but yet a bunch more reforms were placed against the police. What happened after that was that cops resigned en masse, good cops, the ones that you and I need to protect us. They all resigned. They retired. They went to other things. They went on and did other things. We forced them to take a medication in 2020 that they didn't want to take, so we fired them. Those are the people you wanted. And so now those people are gone. And now when I teach law enforcement, one of the first questions I ask at the beginning of the day is, what's your staffing like? What does it look like for you? And agencies are down to from anywhere from 50% of staffing, meaning they only have half the officers they need, to a high of about 75%. So what does that mean? Delayed response times. They're not investigating certain crimes like property crime, traffic collisions. I mean, even some more important crime like assaults or arson. In some agencies, they're not even investigating rapes. Think about how bad that is, okay? So we deploy the National Guard in New York City. Why would you want the National Guard? There's no background checks for the National Guard like there are for law enforcement. There's no testing. They don't have training in domestic law enforcement. And now you're going to have them go out there and help the police. Ask anybody that's any law enforcement officer that's had to work with the National Guard in a domestic law enforcement area. We're not talking about like drug interdiction or something like that. We're talking about like riots and stuff like that. It doesn't work, okay? There's a great video floating around on YouTube of a Minnesota National Guardsman around 2020 during all those riots shooting at a car that he had no right shooting at. So this is who's helping the police. This is the politician's decision on who's going to help us. So law enforcement agencies are hiring people that are relying on their personal history statement. Personal history statement is a very large document where you tell your life's history because they're going to deep dive into it. Traditionally, if you lie on it, like lie about your drug use, crimes that you may have committed, even if you weren't arrested for it, and they find out you did, then you're never going to get hired ever by anybody. And now I'm being told by friends doing background investigations, they catch people lying, and police administrators are hiring them anyways because they need to fill the streets with bodies. Detroit just put out a video where they're helping people clear up their warrants so they can become police officers.
It made them afraid to apply. Let's say you have warrants, traffic tickets. Maybe you don't think you're physically able to complete the physical agility test. We have some resources available to you.
The Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office are hiring illegal aliens to become police officers. And that's problematic in 2 points. Number one, you have illegal aliens arresting citizens. And then the other issue is they're prohibited persons. They can't carry a gun. It's illegal federally for them to have a gun. But yet LAPD and LASO decided to give them guns against federal law so they can pass the academy, and then they carry them on duty every day. That is against federal law. Where's the ATF going after them? No, they're too busy dealing with you in your bump stock. And I'm getting to the point to where we're going to talk about why you need to be your own police officer. Officers aren't getting the training that they need. So I train police officers for a living. Every week I do a new class for police officers. A majority of officers can only attend training if it's online because they're working. They can't just go to class. They have to respond to calls. So I have to leave a recording up of the class so that when they're done with calls, they can go back. That's not a good learning environment. The other thing is they're discontinuing tactical training like active shooter training in favor of guardian type training. There's a movement to change people from police officers because somehow that's racist, to now make them guardians because it's a softer term. And that guardian training is they, them, pronoun training, cultural sensitivity. And that's why we're seeing recently at the Lakeview Church how police perform miserably. They perform miserably at Uvalde. Why you see Acorn Cop lighting up a car for no reason. That's why we're seeing these issues, is because we're not giving them the training that they need. We're not doing the hiring that we need. And what does this mean for you and our churches? Look, when I do church training, for the last several years, I've been telling people, I've been going all the way as if the police aren't showing up. And I get asked the question, well, the police would show up by now. And I'm like, well, if they actually show up, yes. And I've been telling people that we have to act as our own police officers. And if they show up, that's a bonus for us and they can take over. But we have to keep going as if they are not coming. And some people criticize that and said, oh, come on, that's not realistic. Well, look where we are now. Police are manipulating crime statistics. And I was going to do a longer video on this one. On that video, I was going to do a little bit longer and I was going to talk about exactly how they do it, but let's just go over it a little bit. There's a way for them to manipulate statistics so make it look like they have less murders than they really do, less assaults than they really do. The big one is property crime. Some citizens don't call them property crime because they're being referred to do online reporting. And people are like, well, I'm not going to do that. So they don't report it. So now property crime looks like it's down. How you tell what your real crime looks like? Look at vehicle theft. Everybody will always report their vehicles being stolen. It will always be entered into the system because you can track the license plate. And that is the one number that is very difficult for police departments to manipulate, and they often overlook it. So if you want to know what your crime stats really look like, look at vehicle thefts. And in most cities, they're skyrocketing. So is the other crime. It's just that people are manipulating it. So on the news, they will say crime is down. Does it feel like it's down to you? Of course it's not, because people are manipulating the statistics. We know that. So an officer today is going to have a longer response time. They're going to be less professional, meaning they have less training and their background check isn't as strong as it used to be. And that officer that you called has less tactical training, active shooter training, stuff like that, than they did 10 years ago. Now, this needs to be a warning bell for all of us. What can you do and what can your church do? Because here at Christian Warrior Training, we are very much worried about our churches, right? When you do training, you want to look at your response time for law enforcement in your area. So for me, I looked at it. The longest response time was, because we have 4 campuses. One of our campuses, it is 8 minutes. That is a long time. That's the one they're publishing. So it's 8 minutes. Once you get that time, and you can just look at it online, it'll be online somewhere. I want you to increase it by a quarter. So for that 8 minutes, make it like 11 minutes, like 10 or 11 minutes. Why are you increasing it by a quarter? Because departments manipulate that time too. And it's always going to be lower than it really is. And if you add a quarter, that's going to be your real time. But that's the time for one officer to show up. Think about if you're having an active shooter at your church. How long is it going to take for people to get there? The first officer for that one campus is going to be 10 minutes. That's for one officer to show up, and then officers are going to trickle in after that. How long is that going to take? What happens if the phones go down like they did the other day with the AT&T outage that they said was a software problem, but we know the truth? What happens when the phones go down and you can't call the police? You are going to have to be your own police officer. You need to train as if the police are not going to show up. Now, I just need to make a disclaimer. I'm not bashing the police. I was the police for 30 years. I still train them, and I love them. But when I see an incident like Acorn Cop, where the acorn fell from the tree, hit his patrol car, he thought the prisoner inside was shooting at him, so he lit up the car, and it turns out it was just an acorn falling from the tree. The first thing I thought to myself was that guy was hired after 2020. We call them COVID cops. Not to say that everybody hired after 2020 is bad. I'm just saying that's when things started getting bad. And sure enough, he was hired in 2022. Shocker. Didn't see that coming. Every bad incident that I see lately, I always try to find out when the officer was hired. It's always after 2020. I'm not saying that all those people are bad. Definitely not. It's admirable that you still want to be a police officer in light of everything that is going on in the world today. And it is an admirable job. And if you see a cop driving by, you should wave. You should support them the best that you can. Because what's happening is that there are people in America that are trying to dismantle the police. Why? Because they want a federal police force. You're seeing the National Guard come out. They're not capable of policing, but yet they're coming out in cities like New York City and San Francisco. When's it going to come to your city? They want a national police force because there are sheriffs and police officers like me that won't enforce certain laws that they put out because we feel it's unconstitutional. And by driving us out, it makes it easier for them to institute a national police force. For years, I heard, you should just quit then. You don't want me to quit. I'm the one that's keeping the Constitution in order. But yet you drove us all out. Not you personally, but you know what I'm talking about. So I'm letting you know that what's happening in New York City with the National Guard being called out, we're past warning signs. They're doing it. You should know that you are losing your local police. You should know that you need to learn how to become your own police officer. You need to train like a police officer is not going to show up. If a cop shows up, it's a bonus. But go out and train. Go out and train your team, your church security team. Go ahead and train. And do you notice how they're trying to shut that down too? You can see my video on the Paramilitary Act, where they said basically the Paramilitary Act said that they wrote it that basically your church security team is a paramilitary organization. But you see, they're even trying to take that away from us. Hopefully you wake up and see what's happening. 100% this video is going to be demonetized. Do me a favor, head over to christianwarriortraining.com. Sign up for my newsletter. I talk about crimes at churches all week long. I talk about training and things that you can do to make yourself better in training and to improve your tactical proficiency and your decision making. If you can, it'd be great if you did it's always free. Everything's always free, but it would be cool if you did a paid subscription because it helps me do all of this because YouTube is demonetizing everything I do because of the way I talk. So I hope this helps you. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know where we're headed and what you're doing to make yourself more tactically proficient. How do I make myself tactically more proficient? I remember my ABCs. Always be carrying, even when you're doing a YouTube video sitting at your desk.